Kingdom Hearts 3D Dream Drop Distance was released in 2012 for the Nintendo 3DS and later remastered in 60 frames per second and HD for the PlayStation 4 in the 2.8 Final Chapter Prologue compilation in 2017. It's the 7th major installment of the series, and the game directly leading into the events of Kingdom Hearts 3 at long last, serving to bridge the gap between the story threads in Birth by Sleep and Kingdom Hearts 2 and setting up the conflict for the eventual conclusion to the Dark Seeker saga. I'll admit, this is an odd game to talk about because it kind of just lurks in the background of the fan base in a way that no other game truly does, save for perhaps 358 Days Over 2. It isn't as widely disliked as Chain of Memories, as loved as 2 or BBS, and at least among casual players, it isn't nearly as divisive as something like 1 or 3, depending on when you started playing. That said, those who have really sunk their teeth into it definitely have opinions, and most of those aren't very good. The game introduces several mechanics that are discarded or heavily reworked come Kingdom Hearts 3, like the Dream Eaters and flow motion. It introduces story concepts that many people point to when complaining about the convoluted nature of the series' story and lore. And all in all, from public perception, it seems like there's a lot to dislike about this game and not all that much to enjoy on the flip side. Let's see if those folks are right, shall we? Before we begin, however, a couple things. First, like Birth by Sleep, I'm going to be splitting up this video into a few different chunks, roughly exploration, gameplay, and then story, before going into any miscellaneous stuff to round off our discussion during the post-game. Second, for all 2 people that clicked on this video without knowing about Kingdom Hearts, here's the rundown. This guy is Sora, he's the main character. This is Riku, he's another main character, but doesn't really matter in the end, and both can use a legendary weapon of light called a Keyblade. Previously, Sora spent 2 adventures trying to find and save Riku from the darkness inside of him, while battling the Heartless and Nobodies that infested the multiverse, led by Ansem, Seeker of Darkness, and Xemnas respectively. It was revealed, read retconned, in the prequel Birth by Sleep, that all of these events were put into place by an old Keyblade master named Xehanort as part of a plan to find Kingdom Hearts, the specific Keyblade capable of opening it, which is called the Keyblade, and learn the secrets of a long past event known as the Keyblade War, which was fought over those 2 things. Jumping to the present, Sora, and Riku, I guess, is tasked with mustering the strength to free or save the various other Keyblade wielders we've seen throughout the series to bring the fight to Xehanort and defeat him once and for all. Got all that? Great. So the game begins with Sora and Riku taking the Mark of Mastery. Okay, so if anyone hasn't watched my BBS video, go watch it, it's good. But in it, I pretty definitively say that I don't like the Mark of Mastery, and I won't go into that again here. Well, thankfully for me, it ultimately is just an excuse for Sora and Riku to partake in this particular adventure, so it doesn't end up mattering all that much, at least for now. Through an optional flashback, Yensid tasks Sora and Riku with awakening 7 sleeping worlds using their powers, and are transported back in time, I guess, to before they left the Destiny Islands in order to reset their power level to not give them an unfair advantage? I don't know, but anyway, we have a kind of nothing burger fight against the Shadow of Ursula, don't ask me why she's here too, and then we're thrust into the sleeping world that we'll be going through in this game, starting with Traverse Town. Now, boys and girls, you might be wondering, based on Yensid's description of the sleeping worlds, that they were worlds that didn't quite wake up from the darkness after Sora's first adventure, when it very clearly wasn't swallowed by the darkness, and in fact is a world specifically made as a refuge for people whose worlds have been swallowed by darkness. And the answer is, shut up and play around in Traverse Town. Our Final Fantasy stand-ins for this adventure, that being the cast from The World Ends With You, which is another Nomura title for the DS, teach Sora and Riku about their circumstances and about their new abilities, namely the taming of spirits and the use of flow motion, which is this game's main movement mechanic. Now, if you're watching this video, which is, I believe, number 6 in my series, I don't think I really need to go over the general flow of Kingdom Hearts. For as many changes as the games make entry to entry, the formula of going to different Disney worlds, interacting with their characters, fighting dark creatures, and then fighting a boss at the end has held true for all but one game in the entire franchise, so I won't go over that here. That said, there's a lot to say about the way that you go through this process, and it's really never been as intricate as it is in DDD. I think this is going to be a super unpopular take, but it's my opinion that this game has the best level design in the entire series. It's our first look at big, open environments that we'll see far more of come Kingdom Hearts 3, and for a first attempt, I think that they struck an excellent balance between scale and density. Though there are some more linear zones and tighter spaces, most areas are large, open, and yet intricately layered in a way that I find really satisfying to explore. More than anything, these levels feel like a natural extension of the levels seen in Kingdom Hearts 1, which had secrets in every nook and cranny, and various ways to interact with them through the use of magic spells. Aided by this is flow motion and the reality shift mechanic, which I unfortunately don't have a lot to say about other than its use in exploration. On that, any interactable objects are done so through these two things. A spring or an updraft isn't just that, it's a launcher into your flow motion jump. You can grind on rails using flow motion. One of my favorite variants of this particular one is in Sora's version of the Symphony of Sorcery, which has you grinding on rainbows made in the clouds through the reality shift interactables in that world. As well, at least a few times per world, save for I think Prankster's Paradise here in the first block of the game, the reality shift mechanic has dual uses, one in combat and one in exploration. For example, here in Traverse Town with the launcher, objects can be used to blow up conspicuous parts of the walls to reveal hidden chests. It isn't much, but it's welcome variety, especially this early in the game. And to spoil it early, I think the biggest problem with Dream Drop Distance's gameplay is flow motion, which I think is a shame because the concept is very interesting. In essence, if you interact with anything in the environment, flow motion will activate, resulting in a few different moves, most generally a lateral dash and a vertical jump. The rail grinding, pole swinging, and enemy circling I have no problem with. They're fun, they don't get in the way, and they each have their uses, even though some areas, especially the grid, have way too many random grindable parts of the floor. No, the real problem are these two damn things, jumping and dashing. Sticking with just the exploration for a second, most of these areas have clear intended paths which take you through the majority of them. Sometimes there are even climbing or traversal minigames, asides, or challenges that the developers painstakingly included in the level design for the player to take part in. Usually, there's either a puzzle involved in these large rooms, a lot of room to play around in it, or an intended obstacle-filled path that the player is meant to follow. This is all really admirable stuff that I want to highlight as much as I can because this is the kind of design that the series has been missing since its first entry. And that's not to say I want to cherry pick here either. For as impressive as this effort is, especially when the game was originally released on the 3DS, the rooms are still fairly generic. All of them have very clear areas where combat is meant to take place, which are flat platforms that suck major ass baskets, even if it's understandable for the level designers to be limited by the combat system that Osaka team has chosen to implement. As well, and far more egregiously, all of this effort is completely wasted on the vast majority of players due to the sheer ease and power of flow motion. Even if players try to engage with the game on its own terms early on, which is a mistake because the level design is arguably at its worst in both Traverse Town and Notre Dame, the pull to simply skip all of that hassle is far too strong given how easy it is to execute those sequence breaks. Back in the BBS video, I offered a very small bit of praise for Neverland in that game for including a high up ledge in a previous area that you circle back around to in order to access a few chests later in the stage. That kind of design is all over DDD, with chests on high up platforms, areas only meant to be accessible through a reality shift mechanic like these nooks in Notre Dame, or just straight up that same circle around design like here in Sora's Symphony of Sorcery. But none of it ever fucking matters because you can bypass everything with flow motion. You're not even likely to see the care that went into the aesthetic of these areas because of how quickly you traverse the game's zones with flow motion. Let's look once again at Notre Dame. Did you appreciate the clutter on the bridge, the different circus tents and poles being props from the Festive Fools? How about the effort they put in, though the effect is admittedly shoddy, to have Riku's footsteps make splashes in the puddles at this house? What about all the little details found in the Romani underground camp, even though you spent literally 5 seconds in that room? This is one of the best things Osaka team fixes come Kingdom Hearts 3, especially early on with worlds like Toy Box and the Kingdom of Corona, as they draw attention to the work that the world and level designers do with little gameplay vignettes, but we'll get more into that in that video. For now, here in DDD, the game would be much better off without flow motion, at least how it's implemented in the game as it is. I think that there never should have been flow motion actions for general traversal. It simply doesn't make sense given the context of the world and level design. The base movement speed of the characters has already been greatly increased from previous entries, and more grind rails could have been implemented in creative ways to accomplish a sense of speed in the less intricate zones. Add in challenges specifically tailored for the different and typical movement abilities that you get through the story, high jump, glide, and double flight specifically, and you'll already be most of the way there. This point will be brought up again when we get to combat and general gameplay, don't you worry. We are not done complaining about flow motion. More generally, however, the question I have to ask as I write this critique is an interesting one. Do I like Dream Drop Distance? Throughout my 3 streams going through the main story, I said many times that I was enjoying myself, but there were also a lot of times when the process was a slog by being either boring or repetitive. Oh my god, what was that? Oh my All right, I take it back. Oh my god, and I lost it again? I room transitioned. Are you fucking kidding me? All right, the grid is now the worst fucking world in this game. God damn it. In the end, my opinion falls somewhere in the middle, tending towards negative, which is a real shame considering this game has some of my favorite elements of the portable Kingdom Hearts games, like the world and level design, keyblade selection, animation quality, etc. That said, it's undeniable to me that missteps were aplenty, and that I find the holistic experience to be polarizing at best and actively frustrating at worst. For everything that I liked, there were 2 or more things that I didn't. For something incredibly minor, but that serves as a clear example, let's look at Sora and Riku's running animations. I love Sora's running animation, and it's another reason why I think flow motion was a mistake as a general movement ability. The way his form bounces and the speed and purpose with which he moves is just perfect. It feels like the speed and energy of Kingdom Hearts 1 Sora with the confidence of Kingdom Hearts 2 Sora, mixed in with DDD's naturally fast-paced demeanor. Compare this to Ventus's lackadaisical saunter in BBS, and it's really no question that Sora's is better implemented. On the other hand, you have Riku's running animation, which I hate and think is his worst one ever. Granted, his running animations have always been questionable, but they usually had the same bounce and energy, albeit at a slower pace, as I just praised Sora for having. Here, however, you get a lot of jerking motions, and the angle that Riku is leaning makes it feel like he's going to trip and tumble to the ground at any second. I genuinely have no idea what they were going for here. Maybe his lean was meant to signify urgency, but it utterly failed in my opinion. To wrap up my opinion about the exploration and traversal, I want to talk about a recurring topic on my long-form videos: loot quality. It's unfortunately bad in this game. Bleeding into gameplay analysis just a little bit, items are practically useless after you get Cure for the first time, making every item pickup equally useless. That leaves 95% of the rest of the loot relating to the Dream Eater mechanics, which unfortunately isn't going to matter to the vast majority of the player base. And even for those that it does concern, the various small chests that you find either give you a toy that is incredibly cheap at the shop, or materials that are either incredibly cheap as well, or aren't worth that much in the actual breeding mechanic. Especially toward the end game, I found very little worthwhile stuff to be found from any chest, which I found fine in the moment because I had my chat to distract me from how bad the rewards were. But by the time of Block 2, and especially on higher difficulty levels, you're going to want to find specific materials to round out some of your key abilities in preparation for the actually fairly challenging final battles. Namely, you're going to want to find a way to get once more, which isn't easy to obtain in this game thanks to the Dream Eaters that have it being incredibly difficult to make. It's certainly possible with the chests that you find throughout the worlds, but you both need to know not to spend those materials on creating other Dream Eaters, but you also need to know which specific chest in which specific world has the specific fantasy type that's required for these specific 3 Dream Eaters that you can conceivably get that have once more. That's not even going into things like Combo Master or Mega Flare, which are likely to be locked to most players until post-game. Unless, of course, they want to spend a bunch of time cycling through drops until the correct special portals open to get the correct fantasy to drop from them. Oh right, that's why the rewards from chests are so bad, because the developers needed to reserve the good loot for their endgame content, namely the special portals. We'll get to their worth as a gameplay element later, but for now, let's just say it's scummy and lazy. The later fantasy materials required to make some of the more powerful Dream Eaters are locked primarily behind these special portals, meaning you could very easily be entering the final world with total runs backing you while facing down the most powerful enemies in the game. I'm not going to pretend that even the more powerful Dream Eaters are worth the effort as a party member, but just the principle of the thing is a little bit insulting. Believe me, I have a lot to say about the Dream Eaters, but I want to save it until the second block because their creation and growth really is the main gameplay loop of DDD, so we'll reserve the bulk of our analysis until the gameplay portion. Before we move on to that second block, I want to briefly go over my opinions about the batch of worlds we've gone through already. As we'll go over in the gameplay section, you play this game as both Sora and Riku, and each character visits a separate instance of each individual world. Sometimes the change is downright negligible, such as in the grid, and sometimes it's highly pronounced, like in Prankster's Paradise. That said, it's entirely obvious to me in basically every instance that Riku got completely shafted with his world visits. Instead of an even 50-50 split of content between the two characters, Riku's visits were, on average, shorter, simpler, and less engaging. He rarely got to meaningfully interact with the world he visited, usually stumbling across a character that was usually the villain, having a single conversation and/or confrontation destination and moving on to the boss of his visit. Though the comparison is hardly favorable for either character, considering that this is easily the worst world in the game, period, Riku's visit to Notre Dame sees him having a single conversation with Quasimodo, where Riku spouts a platitude at him. He then pursues a Dream Eater to a shack where he spats with Frollo, and then you go back to the church to fight the boss. And I promise you that there is nothing that I skipped, save for a near wordless set piece on the bridge and shantytown areas. The same could be said of his visits to Prankster's Paradise, Country of the Musketeers, and Symphony of Sorcery, leaving his visit to the grid as his sole good world visit in my opinion. In it, he gets to more or less follow the plot of the movie Tron Legacy, as he and main character Sam get to rescue Korra, not that Korra, and get to the bridge for Sam to escape back into the real world, where Riku has to aid him by defeating the shoehorned-in Dream Eater that Clue has at his disposal. By Dream Drop Distance standards, it's a good world visit, even though it lacks the pacing, tension, chemistry between characters, dialogue quality, context for its encounters, and basically everything else that made the world visits in previous games engaging. Notably, the first goal after meeting Sam is to accompany him to a meeting to retrieve a certain thing that turns out to be Korra. Sam doesn't explain that this is the actual purpose for the visits, and when they get to this destination, which is just a random courtyard, instead of letting Riku help him with whatever he does in this place, simply tells him to wait outside, during which Dream Eaters randomly attack for no reason. Then, after Riku defeats them, he runs to find Sam, who was totally going to abandon him, and no mention is made of the ramifications of this obvious betrayal. Meanwhile, let's take a look at Sora's visits in these first three worlds. In both Prankster's Paradise and Notre Dame, Sora gets to follow key plot points from their respective films, with neat twists here and there involving the Dream Eaters, such as the clown ones impersonating Pinocchio as he and Jiminy Cricket attempt to locate him. As well, his visits are generally longer with more elaborate set pieces, including a relevant mob encounter in Notre Dame during the Fest of Fools, which has been reworked to include Dream Eaters that go out of control that Sora needs to stop, a less relevant mob encounter involving giant vines blocking the way to the bridge, and an entire separate underground sequence as he tries to get to Esmeralda in the Romani encampment before Frollo can get to her, while Riku gets a stretch of dirt road and a shack in comparison. In Prankster's Paradise, Sora gets a much more involved storyline of finding Pinocchio through various carnival attractions, including a fun mob encounter with trampolines, going through a seaside cove to get to Monstro, and perhaps the most impressive concept for a reality shift gimmick in the entire game, as you encase Monstro itself in a bubble to explode onto the boss to kill it. Meanwhile, Riku meets Geppetto inside of Monstro, admittedly in a mirror image of his role in the world in Kingdom Hearts 1, which was nice, before going through like 2 rooms with a shifting gravity gimmick, before fighting a boring bug boss with no interesting twist or mechanic to speak of. Finally, though Riku does get his best world visit in the grid, Sora gets an even better grid visit. And it's what I would consider the strongest Disney world from a narrative perspective since arguably Kingdom Hearts 2, because Tron, one of his friends from that game, was turned into the villainous program known as Rinsler, and Sora has to try and return him to his previous self, culminating in a shit boss fight, but ending with Tron for a brief moment remembering Sora, saving him from Clue, and just missing the catch, ending his story in tragedy. As I said when talking about blank points in BBS, Kingdom Hearts succeeds when it focuses purely on the emotion of a scenario. It's incredibly easy to pick on the "my friends are my power" or "Kyrie's inside me" or "you smell like darkness," but despite the odd translations and poor storytelling, the emotions present in Kingdom Hearts rarely feel disingenuous, and during its better moments, they even resonate fairly well. And this is one of those moments. If you care at all about Sora's relationship with his friends, including Tron, then you can at the very least appreciate what this moment is trying to accomplish, and I happen to think it succeeds. I would even go so far as to say that the game peaks here, and this is the most dramatically arresting moment in the entire adventure, which doesn't bode well for the main plot, now does it? This kind of treatment holds true throughout the rest of the game, of Riku being routinely shafted in the narrative and gameplay department, with the exception of the final world where it's reversed, as Riku gets 4 final bosses where 2 of them have multiple phases, while Sora gets a single final boss with only 1 phase that's much less involved and story relevant. I don't think I should need to point out how stupid this treatment is from basically every perspective. Yes, Sora is the main character of the Kingdom Hearts franchise, but Riku is placed in equal importance in this game specifically. This isn't supposed to be a repeat of Chain of Memories, where Reverse Rebirth was an extra mode that aimed to tell a short, focused story of personal growth, while the bulk of the plot was reserved for Sora's story. In Dream Drop Distance, Riku is right there on the cover art, given equal presence to Sora, and yet in the game itself, despite them trying desperately to trick you into believing otherwise, he's shafted. This will get even worse and involve many more characters come Kingdom Hearts 3. Should I start with Dream Eaters? Like, it's the main thing to talk about here in the gameplay section, but honestly, I feel like it's a low-hanging fruit, especially with the kind of obvious comparison is obvious stuff I'll be doing when discussing it. You know what? We're delaying it a little bit more. DDD is the third and final game here in our retrospective that uses the command deck system introduced in BBS. While I maintain that Recoded had the best iteration of the system with how well most commands flowed into each other or into your combos, I would put DDD just behind it, at least in a vacuum. The basic framework is the same as in both of these other games, so I don't think I'll go over it in excruciating detail. You put commands in a deck and you use them with the triangle button, where you have a cooldown before you can use them again, which can be sped up with abilities, yada yada yada, pretty basic stuff. While the system is ostensibly the same as in BBS, there are a bunch of small, subtle changes that end up making a huge difference to the overall game feel, in addition to the balance of each command being vastly improved. Save for Mega Flare in the post-game and the obvious, there is no end-all be-all command or combination that will guarantee victory, like the Surges or Magnet Thunder in BBS. Both the Surges and Magnet have been removed in their entirety, save for Zero Gravisa acting as a worse Magnera-esque ability, while Thunder has been nerfed in its execution speed to where comboing it with other commands is nearly impossible unless they put enemies into a stunned state, with the payoff being its wide range and above average damage on its own. As with Recoded, many physical commands, while not outright linking into combos the way Magic did in Kingdom Hearts 2, nevertheless managed to work well within the combo system of DDD thanks to their quick speed, either making them a good combo finisher or as a kind of manual form of combo modifier, such as using sliding dash to escape a hairy situation mid-combo, or using the best ability in the game, Circle Raid, to make some space around you. The issues with this iteration of the command deck are many, but I wanted to offer that bit of praise before I start complaining like a husky that didn't get their nightly treat. So, Magic is comparatively kind of insanely awful to use compared to physical commands. That isn't universally true, and thanks to my chat, I was still able to have fun using a Magic build with Sora throughout the entire game. But it's very clear that Magic isn't designed to be a main playstyle in DDD. Whereas you could very easily cast Infinite Magic in BBS and have that be the focus of your play, which, don't get me wrong, was incredibly boring, that isn't as achievable of a strategy here. Using purely Magic commands and using them semi-frequently will often result in you just not having any commands available to use. As well, at a baseline, they don't aid your combo game nearly as much as some physical commands, and their damage is mid at best until the late game with some of the more potent combos, or, Mega Flare. I think one of the worst abilities that they introduced here was the Spark series of spells, which are exclusive to Sora. Like so many of BBS's worst commands, Spark takes way too long to use, and does as mid of damage as the rest of the magic spells in the game. The only way that you can really make it work is by pairing it with Zero Gravity, which is the closest equivalent to Magnet in this game. I found some success using Magic in combinations like this, but by and large, this is much less engaging than a physical build. Let's just look at this as a baseline. Using Magic, especially AoE Magic, your goal is to get into the center of a group of enemies, shoot your load, and duck out before you get attacked. Surprise, surprise, that's not particularly fun compared to weaving in, out, and around enemy attacks, blocking and countering, and beating them back with powerful physical commands. Playing as Riku in my run-through was consistently more entertaining because I was forced to meet the game on its own terms, whereas with Sora and his magic, I felt like I was bullying the game more so than playing it. And of course, all of this analysis of the command deck is kind of negligible in DDD because I said in a vacuum earlier. See, there's not one, but two nails in the coffin for enjoying this core aspect of gameplay: enemy design and the Dream Eaters. Let's delay the latter just a little bit more, shall we? If there's one area that DDD utterly fails at, even in comparison to the infinitely worse BBS, it would be in the enemy design. Now, the actual designs of the Dream Eaters are quite charming, and I think that they hold up well when looking at other similar creature collection games like Ni no Kuni, Monster Hunter Stories, Shin Megami Tensei, and Persona, and the obvious comparison is obvious. The Dream Eaters are based on animals, and while their designs don't stray far from that concept, there's an acceptable amount of cartoonification to have them match the cage aesthetic. At the very least, they're way fucking better than the unversed in BBS. No, the enemy design's failure comes purely in the form of gameplay because, among other things, this is another game with a, we'll call it, shaky relationship with hitstun. Obviously, the big Dream Eater bosses that you fight in this game, no less than 9 of the game's 17 bosses actually, will ever be properly stunned by your attacks, unlike comparatively sized bosses from previous games like the Stealth Sneak, Prison Keeper, and the Experiment. What this does is scientists make each boss fight a guessing game about when you can safely attack, and 7 times out of 10, you'll be wrong, as the bosses don't have readable tells, at least for a casual player. Moreover, this kind of guessing game is repeated with many of the game's regular enemies. Any Dream Eater even close to Sora and Riku's size will not be stunned by a regular attack, only by finishers and certain commands. Early on, this isn't as much of a problem, with enemies like the panda and the rhino having long windups for the most part, and generally they're just not that much of a threat to a player that isn't standing still. The trouble comes in later on, as enemies get faster and bulkier. So you have to hit them more, and it's harder to know when to hit them, resulting in, well, I'd be lying if I said it was a difficult experience. See, that's the thing about this game. As a baseline, it shouldn't be hard, and from a traditional perspective, it really isn't. Aside from a few moments when I was paying more attention to chat's shenanigans than the game, I rarely found myself dying. It's incredibly easy to escape from danger thanks to the busted flow motion, and you can spam cure commands if you so desire. No, the deaths usually came from the multitude of little pieces of bullshit present throughout the game. In addition to the lack of hit stun, many enemies have the ability to enter a transitional state which renders them invulnerable, such as when the rhinos dig into the ground. This is exactly like when I bitched about this exact thing in BBS, only 1,000 times worse given just how many enemies can enter one of these states. The invulnerability lasts for a ridiculously long time on some enemies, like the fucking owls, forcing you to straight up switch targets lest you be a sitting duck for several seconds where you will be sniped. Note, not likely to be sniped, it's basically guaranteed thanks to the sheer quantity of enemies you'll be fighting at any given time. Even early on, you'll find groups that have 6 to 7 enemies, and a mixture of slow, fast, large, and small ones. In theory, this is fine, as it teaches the player how to prioritize targets early. Ranged enemies are the most annoying, so they usually come first, but in practice, it usually just results in a big cluster of mad command usage, desperately dodging away from enemies that are mid-attack, and just getting hits in wherever you can. A large offender of this particular problem was the lack of care put into updating the targeting mechanic to accommodate for this increase in enemy density and room size, which is something I recall being less of an issue in Kingdom Hearts 3, though that could just be because you simply nuke entire hordes of enemies in that game rather than dealing with each one individually as in this one, at least with a largely physical build. The issue of off-screen enemies sniping you is one that's been a problem from the very first game in the series, so I'd be lying if I said it was unique to DDD, but it's quite a bit more annoying here because it's the only real way that the game is able to endanger you at all in regular gameplay. There are certainly things to like about the enemy design in this game, so it's not all bad. I quite like the variety of foe you'll be facing, with a healthy mix of different attack patterns, but the sum of their parts is usually lesser than if I were judging each enemy on an individual level. Like, yes, I actually like the horse enemies that can zip around and you have to catch them, but when trying to keep track of 1,000 other things, I find myself growing more annoyed than anything when seeing one spawn. But then it's still not good enough to stop here, because the enemy design isn't actually what makes gameplay so bad for so many people, and no, it's still not the Dream Eater's time in the spotlight yet. The elephant in the room is not the elephant Dream Eater, but is instead Balloon, which is a magic series that is only present in this particular entry, and for good reason. Many people believe that it is the most broken ability that you'll ever have access to in the entire series, and I don't think that's too many shades off from the truth. Balloon and Balloon-Ra, though not really Balloon-Ga, are insane. Base Balloon is like a better version of the mine abilities from BBS, dealing more damage, automatically stunning enemies that hit it, and reloading incredibly quickly, easily allowing you to spam it. Balloon-Ra, on the other hand, is even more broken. Though it has a longer windup, it deals more hits that deal more damage per hit, and each balloon tracks onto an enemy to disrupt them, and it also reloads fairly quickly, especially considering its incredible power. I am well aware of the sheer power of Balloon, and do agree that, if misused, it wrecks any semblance of balance to be found in this version of the command deck. I can't defend its inclusion in any way from that perspective, and I personally don't find using them that fun. This isn't a case like Reflect in Kingdom Hearts 2, which also did bonkers damage and was easy to spam, as Reflect required some timing and had ways to optimize the damage you could deal, such as in combination with Slapshot on some bosses. Balloon is simply mindless spamming, and is a big reason that DDD has a justified reputation of being a game where you just button mash to win. The other reason, and I know I said there were 2 nails and I keep going on and on and on, but I honestly think this is like the worst thing. It's the flow motion, okay? These stupid attacks have the same problem as Balloon. They deal too much damage and are too easy to use. But while Balloon requires even the bare minimum of effort to obtain it, and does have to reload however short of a time that period is, you can very literally spam flow motion attacks endlessly. You can flow motion off of walls, off of poles, off of rails, off of bigger enemies even, and when you do, you can hit the jump button. When in doubt, slam it out. I praised the finisher of Terra's critical impact command style as it dealt good damage and good range for the beginning of the game. With no exaggeration, this entirely spammable slam is a carbon copy of that finisher, deals as much damage, and is only slightly less safe. Why, if I can simply do this attack or use Balloon, would I do anything else with the combat system in DDD? That's the question that every player has to answer, and for most, the answer is I shouldn't use anything else. And can I really blame them? I didn't come here to defend this game. This is fucking horrible design. It's downright embarrassing for a development team to have playtested their game so poorly to have either not noticed how broken this was, or worse, didn't fucking care. Of course, I'm not under the impression that Osaka team didn't know about the flaws in their design, because these very same issues with balance and enemy design were found in BBS already. And not only did they not fix these issues, they made them worse. Yes, aside from Balloon and flow motion, the balance of the command deck is better. You can no longer burn down bosses with 2 shot locks. Hell, they even fixed every problem I had with command styles. But the fact of the matter is that 99% of people don't give half of a flying fuck about any of that, solely due to Balloon and flow motion. It's not the job of the player to have to fight to get a balanced game out of their Kingdom Hearts. It's an insult for Osaka team to force them to do so. Before I move on to talking about the other elephants in the room, and yes, I'm delaying the Dream Eaters even more, I want to briefly touch on the drop system that people apparently find contentious about this game. Like BBS, you play as multiple characters, but because people like me complained way back when about having to reset your game with a new character 3 fucking times, Osaka team instead implemented the drop system to facilitate switching characters repeatedly throughout the adventure. You might be surprised to hear this after the scathing rant I just went on, but I actually don't really care about this mechanic. It's not that I don't care for it, I'm just completely neutral, because the game offers a single readily available resource to simply not engage with it. Basically, you have this gauge that kind of looks like the drive bar from Kingdom Hearts 2, and it slowly fills at a rate determined by that little number next to it. It'll raise 3 times from yellow to pink to black, and when it fills all the way up, and you'll notice that I didn't even bother to get footage for this because it doesn't actually matter, you'll have a little bit more time before you're forcibly dropped to the other character. This has many issues when looked at head on. As we'll see, Osaka team has a frustrating aversion to giving the player any semblance of control over the game they're supposed to be controlling. So the fact that you're forced to drop when the meter fills up is immensely frustrating to many people. This is especially annoying during boss fights, as when you drop back into the fight, it completely resets as if you died and reloaded. Imagine if you were 1 hit away from beating it and then you got forcibly dropped. Now that would be frustrating. The reason that I say I don't care is because of the Drop Me Not item. Money isn't particularly valuable in this game, and these items are far from expensive anyway, so I just stocked up on Drop Me Nots, put them into a second deck configuration, and periodically switched to it, used the item, and then switched back, effectively resetting my drop gauge and allowing me to continue playing as whichever character I wanted for as long as I felt like it. It's not at all difficult to do, even though it's annoying that I had to do it in the first place in order to play the game how I wanted to play it. Instead of forcibly dropping the player to the other character, I think a better way to incentivize character switching would be to add some kind of a fatigue mechanic, where as the drop gauge reaches those different thresholds, the character you're controlling gets progressively more tired, resulting in minor debuffs. Emphasis, I'd want them to be extremely minor until the gauge is completely full, maybe like a 5% damage debuff or something. And then when the gauge is full, the debuffs will then become more severe until you drop to the other character or use a Drop Me Not. Something like cutting your max HP in half, or locking out half of your commands randomly, or halving your stats or something. That way, you could still conceivably finish up whatever you were doing without interruption, while being told that, hey, it's probably time to go to the other character. At the very least, the drop gauge should have been paused during story encounters, so that whatever tension is present in whatever is going on won't be interrupted by bad luck. But now, my friends, we come to the real elephant in the room. 0.2, a fragmentary passage. No, alas, we're going to discuss the Tamagotchis, otherwise known as the Dream Eaters. Unlike BBS, you actually have party members this time around, which has its pros and cons in itself. For such a visually cluttered game like this, adding 2 extra entities doing stuff probably wasn't considered as much as it should have been, but hey, they're here, so let's deal with them. In the dream realms that this game takes place in, Sora and Riku have the ability to tame and or create friendly dream eaters called spirits, while the ones you fight are called nightmares, and this plays out like many creature collector games, where you have to raise the spirit by playing with it, nurturing it like your own child, and then bringing it to cut a bloody swath through its former friends and allies. You know, to build calluses. In theory, I don't have a problem with this system. Let's be real, compared to the abstract as fuck command board nonsense, at least this annoying detour to gameplay is contextualized, however poorly, into the story. The devil, however, as always, is in the details. But before I go into the many flaws with this system, I want to say that despite the complaints I have, I actually don't personally mind it. While I'm glad it's reserved for this game alone, I had fun with my chat making new Dream Eaters and naming them. I even had a ton of fun simping over the Kairu line, to the point where my obsession became so severe that I committed gross animal abuse and or negligence by sacrificing another Dream Eater in a protracted secondhand murder for its components to make Lord Kairu the ultimate frog boy. Die! Die, motherfucker! Oh yeah, get him! Oh, eat! Oh my god, eat shit! Come on, get some damage in. Come on, get him! Get him! Come on! Ah, no, not the bat! Yeah, get him! Get him! Come on, get the fucking tiger! Ow! Ow! Keep it, tiger. Get him! Come on! No, he's putting up too much of a fight. Yeah! Oh my god! This is so fucking stupid. Yes! Fuck yeah. All right, now I just gotta wait out 30 seconds. Yes! Give me that fucking material. Yeah! Like, come on, you're not gonna get those types of shenanigans from fucking command melding. That said, this situation presents one of the problems with the system as it's seen in DDD. And as a whole, the creature collection mechanic of this game is an utter failure, and I'll explain it with the obvious comparison. So Pokemon is a thing, and people like it a lot, still going strong into Gen 9 with now just over 1,000 unique creatures to collect. Like DDD, Pokemon has an intended core gameplay loop of capturing, raising, and battling Pokemon, with different side activities to do with them depending on which game you're playing, like contests or the Olympics for some reason. Much like how making and raising Dream Eaters isn't the core focus of DDD, catching Pokemon isn't necessarily the main goal of a Pokemon game. Rather, in all but a select few, the goal is to defeat the gym leaders in whatever region you're in, and then proceed to challenge the Pokemon League and become that region's champion, with each step in that process producing harder and harder battles. Rather, catching Pokemon is a means of facilitating the customization of a player's experience. Each run-through of the same Pokemon game has the potential to play out completely different from a gameplay perspective. Yes, you're still battling, yes, you're playing through the same fights, but your party's matchups against those fights aren't likely going to be the same. Unless you always run through the game with the same team over and over, that is. To add further fire for points I'm about to make, not only was there a concerted effort from the franchise's conception to make the process of catching Pokemon as engaging as possible, for better or worse in early entries, but there was a huge incentive to properly raise a Pokemon and increase its level, thanks to it learning new moves as it levels up, and because many evolve once they reach certain level thresholds, unlocking a new tier of power for that line. Let's now jump back to the Dream Eaters and see how it compares. We all know it won't do so favorably, come on, let's be serious here, but let's start generous. There is definitely an incentive to properly raise Dream Eaters. Thanks to their link board and the resource you use to progress through it, link points, you gain not only passive abilities like attack and magic haste, but also new commands or permanent abilities like second chance and once more. Another positive I would propose is that if you simply don't care about the mechanic or just want to get through the game as quickly as possible, then assuming you're on a reasonable difficulty level, you don't have to engage with any of it. You can run through the game with just the Meow Wow and Komori Bat you're you're forced to make at the start of the adventure. That's a valid way to play the game, and honestly, I wouldn't blame you at all for doing that, because what the hell is bad Pokemon doing in my Kingdom Hearts? There are several reasons why the Dream Eater gimmick is specifically bad Pokemon too. And note, I'm just using Pokemon because it's what I'm familiar with, not because it's more or less similar to it than other creature collectors. Anyway, all of these reasons have to do with the way that the Dream Eaters grow in relation to what the game expects of the player. Personally, I think the link board should never have been a thing. I think it's a stupid mechanic and should have been thrown out as soon as it was proposed, in favor of level-based ability gain a la Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. The Dream Eaters already level up and get stronger, and there are even gates on some link boards that have a level requirements, but these are few and far between. And besides that, there's no real meaning to the Dream Eaters leveling up at all. Hell, the game doesn't even tell you the effect of it, unlike when Sora and Riku level up and you learn which stat increased from the whole experience. Now you may be saying, well, it works like that anyway because you get the link points necessary for the board from fighting, just like you would to gain experience. To which I have two counter arguments. First, why complicate it if it's going to function identically anyway? And second, fighting isn't the main way to gain link points. No, that honor belongs to the water barrel. Should you choose to do so, you can use various toys to bond with your Dream Eater party and gain affinity, EXP, or link points, the latter being gained from the water barrel. This is an almost mindless task, where you play bad pinball with floaty underwater physics for a whole minute, and then are rewarded with link points. This sounds tedious, and it is, but thanks to my chat, I learned that you don't even have to play the minigame. You can literally enter it, exit, and still gain around half of the link points that you would have gained from doing the whole thing. Considering just how cheap the water barrel is at the Moogle shop, this is an absolutely life-saving exploit, if for nothing else but my sanity. I definitely wouldn't mind these toys as a way to supplement growth found in normal gameplay, similar to Pokemon and Me found in post-Generation 6 Pokemon, and in fact, I could see some fun optimization potential here. So you know how in the other games you could choose between a sword, shield, and staff route, which determined which abilities you get at particular levels? Well, what if the same could be done for Dream Eaters, but the different toys you use determine which path they currently take, maybe in the form of the dispositions that are already in the game. And just so I can mention it, the dispositions just affect how their AI works. This way, assuming you know which level they would gain an ability, you could then choose from 3 abilities depending on which path they're on. Depth, planning, engagement. As it is, raising Dream Eaters is entirely unengaging because it either happens in the background when you're going through the game or through a boring, skippable minigame. And that's not the only problem with Dream Eaters, believe me. Just the fact that you don't have any kind of capture mechanic is quite frankly embarrassing. Sora and Riku wield the Keyblade, able to fight darkness and literally use the power of light, and you're telling me that they have no way to purge a nightmare of its darkness and make it a spirit? Well, okay, how do we get spirits if we don't do something like that? Oh, we make them like you would synthesize a fucking earring in Kingdom Hearts 2. Great. Okay, so we're gonna take a detour and talk about the loot in this game again, because I think it was handled that poorly. Like a full 95% of the chests you find in the game contain either a Dream Eater material or a recipe to make a Dream Eater. This wouldn't be that bad if not for 3 things. First, the drop rate for materials from enemies is already high enough that I was regularly entering double digits on even moderately valuable items. Second, especially during a shop rush, you can simply purchase most of the materials from the shop with regular money, which you can grind infinitely thanks to the Drop Me Not item. Third, the vast majority of the late game final form Dream Eaters require materials that are either finite in select late game chests or only available in the special portals, which are combat challenges that the game only spawns 1 of in each world per drop out of a random 6 per world. For any casual player, they will never be able to make Dream Eaters like the Ryu Dragon, which is the only way for Sora to get Super Glide, by the way, or the Tantrum Rex, which is one of the easier ways to get once more. Fuck, look at the psychopath I was reduced to when trying to get my precious Lord Kairu. For most players, they're going to be stuck with, at best, mid-tier spirits. Aside from my Lord Kairu and the Kibalion I sacrificed to get it, the best spirit I got in my main playthrough was probably Chef Kairu. I could have gotten spirits comparable to that, sure, but certainly nothing better. Just fucking Just answer me this. In what world is it reasonable for a Keeble Lion Nightmare to not drop at least one of the materials needed to make it? Honestly, how does that make any semblance of sense? And you know the worst part about the Dream Eaters? They don't even fucking matter. I'm serious, for gameplay purposes, they determine exactly two things: which limits / command styles you have access to, and what link board you're working with, neither of which are tied to their actual performance in battle. You can go through this entire game, and I have done so at least twice on Proud mode, completely ignoring your Dream Eater allies because they contribute nothing to the battles. The only exception I found on this playthrough specifically was when I was actually looking for it, and it was just the Kairu's occasionally healing me and casting the Spirit Roar buff to increase my physical damage. Like, okay, yeah, that was super cool. Why was this the only instance of a spirit doing anything remotely useful? Going back to Pokemon briefly one last time, I want to remind you that the entire playthrough changes depending on which Pokemon you choose to capture and raise. Meanwhile, in DDD, your game plan isn't going to change in the goddamn slightest whether you bring a Skelterwild or a Komori Bat. So why do I care? Just fucking grind for whatever abilities you want with Water Barrel and go back to whatever party comp you were already winning with, instead of needlessly experimenting. Okay, so I just spent 4.5 pages complaining about this system. Why don't I completely hate it? Well, it's because I'm more indifferent to it than anything. For as bad as it is, I didn't mind the system because it was as unintrusive as I chose to make it. If I wanted to stop halfway through the playthrough, I very easily could have, which made it a lot easier to keep going since I had an out. A kind of reverse claustrophobia situation there. Second, I actually really like the designs of the Dream Eaters, like I said before. I certainly don't think they're the strongest designs in a creature collection game, and they're definitely not as good as the Heartless and Nobodies, but they were solid, cute, and as whimsical as the rest of the game. This made it easier to justify experimentation just on a purely aesthetic level because I wanted some visual variety. It's literally no different than the dopamine of finding a shiny Pokemon. I just think they're neat. Finally, before we move on to our third block, there are some miscellaneous things about Dream Eaters that I didn't go over in much detail. So, the dispositions. I didn't know they were a thing that mattered until this playthrough, which contributes to a larger potential point about how nothing about Dream Eater growth is ever explained to the player, which certainly didn't help people's opinion of the whole thing. What I personally don't like about them is that you change them most consistently by poking or petting a certain spot on a Dream Eater, and that spot is rarely clear. If their designs were a bit more intuitive as a baseline, then this wouldn't be as big of an issue. As well, some dispositions open up new paths on a Dream Eater's link board, which I'm of half a mind about. On the one hand, I'm glad none of them ever lead to anything substantial because that would get very frustrating very quickly, but on the other, it makes me wonder what the point of it is considering just how inconsequential these new paths end up being like 90% of the time. Lastly, there's the Dream Eater ranks, which go from F to star rank. These are the equivalent of IVs in Pokemon, or I guess just genetics in real life. Some Dream Eaters are built different, and while different combinations of materials can make the same Dream Eater, better materials tend to make one of the higher quality, with beastly increased stats. Honestly, I like this system, as it cuts down on any bullshit with RNG that could waste valuable materials, so I'll leave it there. As for the worlds in this block, I'm actually quite positive, at least on Sora's side. As before, take these positives with a grain of salt, as this is comparing these to the other worlds in DDD. But Sora does have a decent storyline with Musketeer, Mickey, Donald, and Goofy, with a fun T-Rex chase sequence and climbing up the tower shortly after that, and we actually have something really unique for his boss in Symphony of Sorcery. The Dream Eater that was messing with Traverse Town on the second visit makes its reappearance after escaping, and Sora has to kill it here. A boss callback that wasn't a part of the big bad villains of the game. Pretty neat. That said, even after having just played it, I can barely remember the order of events, or even the boss experience of any of Sora's worlds in this block. I recall that there were storms in Symphony of Sorcery, and that there was that T-Rex and tower climb in Country of the Musketeers, but if you ask me about Traverse Town 2, with either character, I wouldn't be able to tell you a damn thing, which is the same that I could say about Riku's entire game, am I right? Riku's worlds, as usual, are shorter and have less going on. You fight Chernobog in the most boring and easy minigame ever, and you don't actually fight him, despite having a mechanic already in the game to let Riku fly in the air, as seen in Notre Dame, which would have made the fight from Kingdom Hearts 1 entirely possible. Just saying. In his Country of the Musketeers, you do basically nothing but a hide-and-seek game, and then the boss literally appears out of nowhere in the exact cutscene before you fight it, and no explanation or foreshadowing was given to explain its existence. So, I mean, it's as bad as the rest of the bosses in this game, too big, no hit stun, weird hitboxes, etc. I have no need to go over any of them in great depth. With all of that out of the way, boys and girls, we're in the endgame now. Dream Drop Distance has a full 2 fewer worlds than BBS, where BBS also has mini worlds like the Land of Departure, the Mysterious Tower, and the Mirage Arena, plus a more robust post-game, as there are no extra episodes and 3 fewer super bosses in DDD compared to BBS. This isn't a knock against DDD, considering that the quality on display is higher than in BBS in general, but I felt that it was worth pointing out that, by all metrics, you're getting less unique content here than in BBS. That said, we have a final world for both Sora and Riku, the world that never was, in a form that's arguably better realized than its appearance in Kingdom Hearts 2, with totally unique areas between the two characters, where Sora is in the shifting city with trippy angles and toppled buildings acting as your walkways, while Riku is inside the castle and ascending it via flow motion and puzzles. This is a super welcome change of pace, though Symphony of Sorcery did something similar, and that the unique zones offer more than just a cosmetic difference is great too. Sadly, that's about where the positives end for me. This is the point in the game when the bullshit of enemy hit stun, or lack thereof, reaches its breaking point, and at this stage we've become privy to the kind of bullshit that's present in this game's story, which we'll be going into now. So the setup, for those that forgot, is that Sora and Riku are taking the Mark of Mastery exam as delineated by Yen Sid. In it, both must travel to and seal 7 sleeping worlds that Sora restored by defeating the darkness in the first game, but that haven't fully awakened yet. By doing this, Yen Sid aims to have the two learn of a power that will eventually help them defeat the machinations of Xehanort as his master plan trudges on to near completion. Throughout each world, both Sora and Riku have been visited by both old villains in Ansem and Xemnas, who are somehow alive again, as well as a new character who is revealed here at the end to be young Xehanort from before he ever left his home world and began his journey. Yup, we've got time travel up in this bitch. Before we all raise our pitchforks and say that this is stupid, let's acknowledge that stories featuring time travel can be done well, or be good in spite of wonky time travel logic and paradoxes. Doctor Who is a good example of the latter, as is Harry Potter 3, and I just finished up watching Vivi Fluorite Eye's Song, and it uses the idea of time travel and altering the timeline in a fascinating way to build drama, tension, and intrigue throughout each of its arcs. That DDD introduces a form of time travel isn't the problem in itself, let's make that clear. No, what makes this twist stupid is that Xehanort is a bad character, and Leonard Nimoy can't fix that. Before we get into the nitty-gritty though, let's go over the rest of the story. Okay, so Sora and Riku arrive in the world that never was. Sora is told by Xigbar that his clothes allowed the real Organization 13, I hate that this is their official title, to track his every move and make sure that he was going where they wanted him to go. This also isn't too far outside the realm of possibility, as the Organization's cloaks have always had a magical effect connected to them, so using clothes to do weird shit is in character for them, believe it or not. Especially because Sora specifically points out how weird his new clothes are at the beginning of the game. The question is, of course, why the real Organization 13 would want to track Sora. Remember, before this reveal, and before this journey in general, Sora wasn't even aware that they existed, so it wasn't like they wanted to track him and make sure that he wasn't ruining their plans. In reality, the real Organization 13 is down a member yet, and want to make Sora their number 13, since Riku, their first choice, has become resistant to the darkness from his constant struggle against it. So, with powers that I don't think are ever explained, they induce sleep into Sora and basically lead him into a trap. Along the way, Sora meets various people connected to his hearts, namely Roxas and Xion, and we get like the only bit of good characterization from Sora in the entire game, where he insists that Roxas isn't just a part of him, but is his own unique person that deserves a life of his own. To which Roxas says that this innate kindness is why Sora must be the hero, while Roxas must support him. At the end of his trek through this world, Sora says, "My friends are my power," fights Xemnas, and then falls into a coma. Again, I might have missed something, but I don't know why this happens. I guess Sora just got really tired or something. On Riku's side, he ascends the castle and finds Sora in a seemingly endless slumber, only to be attacked by not only this anti-black coat, but Ansem, Seeker of Darkness, in a two-phase battle, where it's revealed that Riku is, in a way, a Dream Eater himself, and that his world were actually a manifestation of Sora's dreams, which he has been purging of nightmares along the way. In other words, it's literally Inception, and to figure out why this is dumb, we need to go deeper. So the rules of the Dream Realm, or whatever it is, have never been properly explained, but that's not a huge issue since this series hasn't explained basically anything about how its world functions. What bothers me about the Dream Realm in comparison to the realms of light and darkness is that its apparent rules and functions are plot critical details that are made up as the game goes along. In Traverse Town, Joshua explains something along the lines of Sora and Riku being in two different versions of the same world, and they see images of each other in this world and this world only. Okay, so is Traverse Town unique because they can see each other here and not in any other world? Or is this image that they see a result of Joshua existing in both worlds and like projecting them onto each version? Or I don't know, I'm getting confused. Okay, so if the intention from the beginning was for Riku to be purging Sora's dreams of nightmares, why does that not have any kind of effect on Sora's worlds? The only thing I can think of is in the Country of the Musketeers, where Riku's actions messed up Pete's villain plan in Sora's world for some reason that's never explained. You could have had some good moments along these lines and made this twist feel more intentional instead of coming across like an asspull, which it definitely does now. This is also not even mentioning that Sora and Riku meet people that appear in earlier games. Pete, Mickey, Geppetto, Jiminy Cricket, etc., who don't recognize them. And this is explained so poorly that I'm still not sure I've gotten this right in my head, despite having played this game 3 times and researched on the wiki. I think what's happening, is that these worlds in the present timeline, as in post KH2, are awakened. At the beginning of the game, Yensid explains that he sent Sora and Riku back in time on Destiny Islands to just before the world was swallowed by darkness in the first game. This is the explanation why the two of them look so much younger than they did in Kingdom Hearts 2. So then I guess this game technically takes place concurrently with KH1, or it's like an alternate timeline maybe? I mean, I guess that would explain why Ansem and Xemnas are still alive, right? So these worlds are then trapped in the Dream Realm or something, and the characters within them are versions of the characters that are caught in some kind of time loop until the world is awakened. Maybe, I guess? Look, the reality of the situation is that none of this actually matters. The only reason that's ever given is stupid nonsense, and this whole thing is just an excuse to explain why these returning characters act completely different and don't recognize Sora and Riku, even though Tron remembers Sora at the end. And Space Paranoids didn't fall into darkness after Kingdom Hearts 2, so how could it be sleeping? I hate the Kingdom Hearts lore so goddamn much, man. Whatever, let's get back to the main plot. Sora is captured by the real Organization 13, and Mickey and Riku stage a rescue mission, where Riku fights off young Xehanort before the real Xehanort finally makes his appearance. After that, Axel appears, or Lee, oh yeah, he appeared earlier in the game too, and saves the day before Riku dives one more time into Sora's dreams, fights the manifestation of Ventus that's protecting Sora in the dream, and the game ends with Riku passing the Mark of Mastery, Sora essentially being a scrub and reverted to a newbie because reasons, and he also has to go discover a new power once again. Okay, let's talk Xehanort. In my opinion, Xehanort is a bad character and a bad villain. In his debut game, the only reason he succeeds is because of the sheer incompetence of our protagonists, and not because of his own wit, even though the game desperately wants you to believe the opposite. Surprise, surprise, he was a hit with fans, and so Nomura decided to bring him back and introduced time travel to do it. According to Dream Drop Distance and Onward, Xehanort has been planning every event in the entire series and uses time travel to recruit all of his incarnations, including young Xehanort, Ansem Seeker of Darkness, and Xemnas, into a real Organization 13 in order to recreate the Kai Blade. Apparently, to forge the Kai Blade, you must reform the power that it split into, in the form of clashes between 7 lights and 13 darknesses, hence his organization being the Darknesses, and our heroes having to recruit the other Keyblade wielders from the other games and form the 7 lights. Now hold on. You might be thinking to yourself that this doesn't make sense because the Kaiblade apparently formed in BBS with just Ventus and Vanitas clashing. I thought it was just a pure light and a pure darkness that had to clash. Of course, the obvious answer is that Nomura is a hack writer and doesn't plan ahead, so we'll move on from there by saying that this is a retcon. Okay, moving past that fact, why is this bad? Let's be real, everyone knows that this is bad writing, but why? I've never seen it adequately explained before. Well, to me, it's a combination of a few things: diminishing narrative stakes, loss of focus on the protagonists, and retcon syndrome. One of Kingdom Hearts' issues, which I'd point out is far from unique to this series, is that it blows its load too early. In a proper, long-form epic story, stakes tend to ramp up from very contained to world-shatteringly epic. From the beginning, every mainline entry in the KH series has went for the same world-shatteringly epic conclusion, where each final battle is a fate from the multiverse itself. This kind of structure runs dry very quickly, and I think fans broke through that threshold here in DDD. Not only is this another instance of the world ending, as if Xehanort achieves his goal, he's essentially going to recreate the universe with the power of the Kaiblade and Kingdom Hearts, but this is the exact same plan he had in the last game, only instead of Terra, he wants to take over Sora, so the repetition is doubled and passed to the next game. This massively irritates many people and is the source of those diminishing stakes. The second issue is a lack of focus on our protagonists. In most entries in the series, even BBS, the focus is mostly on at least one of our protagonists, almost exclusively. BBS had Terra and Ventus' respective forms of nonsense and internal conflict, Days had the entire Seesaw trio, KH2 had Roxas, Riku, and to an admittedly lesser extent, Sora. KH1 and Chain of Memories had Sora and Riku, while Recoded had a shit story. DDD doesn't focus on its protagonists, and actually tends to view them as simple plot devices for the vast majority of its runtime, which is in the Disney worlds. Neither of them have any personal stake in anything that's going on within those worlds, and no time is taken to endear us to their connection with any of the Disney characters aside from Sora with Tron. Even here in the endgame, Riku's role isn't one of an important character, but an important weapon. He gets a token effort to expanding his character by trying to redefine what his values are in relation to his newfound steps in the light after so long, but what does it amount to? You don't get the sense that he would have done anything different if he didn't have those faux revelations. He still would have fought and defeated Ansem, and he still would have saved Sora, so who cares? Meanwhile, for Sora, he gets some decent character work done in those brief moments he has with his hallucinations, but he also doesn't really have a purpose as a character. For all we know, because our understanding of why Sora was chosen as a vessel is so poor, ultimately he was just another body for Xehanort. There's nothing in Sora's character that really mattered, and ultimately he's reduced to a literal plot device, with no resolution to the various threads that were introduced by those hallucinations. The issue that stems from this complete lack of focus and weight of character is that the climax of the story is purely physical. And not just that, but purely physical on both sides of the conflict. Because let's be honest here, most KH games don't have a character-focused climax on the side of the protagonists. And I would argue that's why most KH climaxes feel hollow. Games like Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 get away with this because of their work after the fight is over, with Riku's redemption by willingly staying in the realm of darkness, and his and Sora's talk and resolution to their issues with each other after they beat Xemnas, respectively. Meanwhile, I would argue the most thematically and dramatically successful climax in the series comes with Days, with the double whammy of Xion's death and Roxas' subsequent assault on the organization that was ultimately stopped by Riku, which is all fueled by Roxas' character. In DDD, there is no such character, no resolution, no pathos to this ending. This would be the end of part 4 of 5 in a Stormlight Archive book. This would be the ending of the second movie in a trilogy, where there are plot revelations but very few character resolutions, because that's supposed to be saved for the final movie. Here's the issue. Dream Drop Distance released in 2012, and Kingdom Hearts 3 released in 2019. 7 years later. For those 7 years, this was the end of the story. Great. Finally, and this is I think what most people would point to, it's the retcon syndrome. Now, we've discussed retcons plenty of times in this retrospective of the series in KH2 and BBS, and instances found in those games were truly awful, especially the latter. While I maintain that I dislike the retcons in BBS more than those here, even I have to admit that this game handled them far less elegantly than BBS did with its own retcons. One could argue, in my opinion unsuccessfully, that the retcons in BBS don't ultimately affect the lore and narrative of the other games. You simply can't make that argument for DDD. It implies, if not outright states, that this is a plan that's been in motion from the very beginning. That Ansem and Xemnas were working together from the start, that the original organization had a totally different goal than what was explained in their game, that everything has been leading to the clash between 7 lights and 13 darknesses. It might shock you to say that I don't have a lot to say about this simply because it's obvious why it's bad. To put it mildly, this is an insult to anyone that cared about the conflicts, character work, world building, or pathos of the other games. Why should I care anymore about Sora's efforts in KH1 and 2 if Ansem and Xemnas just survive anyway? Why should I care about Riku overcoming the darkness in Chain of Memories if Ansem is just gonna keep influencing him in the same way as in that game forever and ever? Why should I care about Aqua and Ventus destroying the Kaiblade in BBS if it was never the real one to begin with and was a pointless gesture on top of that? Why should I care at all anymore? Kingdom Hearts is a series about whimsy. It's a game where you travel through different Disney worlds with Donald Duck and Goofy Goof and have fun with wacky characters. It can be dramatic, and in its best moments, it can even be somewhat thought-provoking, but it was always at least interesting. I think that they were at least attempting this feeling in BBS, but for the first time in the entire series, including BBS, including Recoded, including Chain of Memories, I can't say that they were trying to do something interesting for Dream Drop Distance. It's the only game in the entire franchise where the only conclusion I can come to is that it's exposition. It's a space filler. Its only purpose is to set up Kingdom Hearts 3 while utterly failing to stand as an entry, game, or story in its own right. I certainly don't think that Dream Drop Distance is worse than BBS, to be clear. BBS was a straight 1 out of 10 for me, with nothing interesting going on at all, and other stuff that just pissed me off. Though I have a lot of problems with DDD, I actually sort of liked the Dream Eater aspect of the game, and thought that the command deck system was much better balanced aside from Balloon, as well as the Dream Eaters themselves having much more memorable designs than most of the unversed. No, DDD isn't an out-and-out terrible game. It's a strong 3 to a light 4 for me, maybe like a 2 in its worst moments. Basically on the barely acceptable range of what I would play, even if I don't enjoy the product holistically for this, that, or the other reason. It's about the same score I give to the Final Fantasy VII Remake, despite spending 2 whole videos complaining about it, because there are indeed things that I like about both that game and this one by extension. Before I go into the main topic for this section, I felt like I should highlight some other miscellaneous aspects of the game that I don't have enough to say about to make their own sections, one of which being Flick Rush. This is the equivalent to BBS's command board, and is the only major minigame in Dream Drop Distance, aside from, like, Riku on the light cycle and the grid and the dives, both of which I have nothing to say about. Flick Rush sees you using your team of Dream Eaters fighting other Dream Eaters in a tournament, where you use cards based on attacks those Dream Eaters do, and try and beat the enemy card's number. It's a less interesting version of Chain of Memories, with none of the interesting deck building found in that game, which means that this is just a fancy game of war. I have very little else to say about it, and I chose not to play this minigame to completion, as all you get is a mediocre Keyblade. Next, I want to talk about the music. You'll notice that I didn't mention the music a single time in the Birth by Sleep video because I thought that there was nothing to say. It had the most bland soundtrack of the entire franchise in my opinion. Dream Drop Distance largely follows that trend, though I think it fares slightly better. It carries a somewhat consistent theme of slower paced tunes with a more ethereal quality than any comparable tracks in the other games. I think this is best seen in the track Traverse in Trance, which, aside from having a phenomenal title that I want to steal so badly because it's so evocative, is bar none the best version of the Traverse Town theme we've ever gotten. It adds a quality to the original melody that I can't quite put my finger on to describe in however many words, but I think a good feeling that it evokes for me personally is imagining walking in a snow-dampened city shopping center at holiday time. Lights surround you, but any sounds from passersby feel muted and far off, to where you can, for once in a blue moon, be totally at peace in the normally chaotic landscape of urban modernity. Of course, even Traverse in Trance isn't the best version of the theme in my opinion. Insane in the Rain's jazz arrangement blows it out of the water, and it's my go-to version for sure. Finally, I want to talk about Critical Mode. Unlike every other game that it features, Critical Mode isn't available upon first starting the game, since it's unlocked only once you beat it for the first time, and when you can inherit any Dream Eaters that you made from that previous game. So, in a sense, you could view Critical Mode as a glorified New Game Plus, and it seems that the developers thought of it this way as well. Before my old capture card died, I attempted to capture a Critical Mode playthrough without inheriting Dream Eaters, and this was a huge mistake. Enemies are too fast, unpredictable, and durable to justify not having second chance and once more very early into the game. This would be fine in BBS since you can get those abilities very easily, but you can't get once more until the second half of the game from a fresh file, making most bosses complete RNG as to whether they kill you or not, as they can do so with one unlucky string of bullshit. My breaking point came with Riku's boss in the grid, which I simply could not beat after 3 hours of attempts. TLDR, if you want to play Critical Mode in Dream Drop Distance, save yourself the trouble and do it as a New Game Plus. With that said, let's get into the post-game. Honestly, I don't even think I need to put anything in this section. Anyone who has looked into this game even a little bit knows that Dream Drop Distance doesn't really have a post-game. You can rematch various world bosses through secret portals, you can do all of the cycling special portals and obtain all of the Dream Eaters from the materials you get, and I guess if you want, you can also fight this game's lone super boss. Julius can be found in the Fountain Plaza in Traverse Town as both Sora and Riku, and he just crawls out of the sewers, loses, and crawls back into it, after which you can summon him back to fight him again. I think it's interesting to have a non-original and non-Final Fantasy character be a super boss for the first time since the first game's Ice Titan, but Julius is as bad of a boss as any in this game, though it doesn't quite reach the same level of bullshit found in BBS's super bosses like Mysterious Figure and No Heart. It's entirely possible to beat him at low levels directly after beating the game, and I almost did, but his attacks are not fun to deal with, have bullshit tracking, are designed to get around once more, and the boss itself moves so quickly around the battlefield that trying to keep up with him in a fair way is a fool's effort at best. Thus, in the end, I resorted to balloon spam, and I think this highlights just how broken Balloon really is. Compare my Thundaga damage to my Balloonra damage, and it's night and day. Even with Riku, who had a lower magic stat and without the boost from dropping, a single good Balloonra took out half of an HP bar. It's absolutely insane. You get the Ultima Weapon Keyblade from defeating him, and this is something that I despise. Setting aside that the Ultima Weapon is something that's meant to be an ultimate reward for a long, arduous task and/or gauntlet, I don't like having Keyblades be the reward for post-game tasks. This was an issue in BBS too, but most of the Keyblades you got were worthless in that game, so I didn't mention it there. Here, the stats you get from Keyblades are out of control, and most of the ones you obtain are significantly better than even Dive Wing, arguably the best Keyblade you can get before the end of the game. I would much rather have had a crown system a la Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix implemented instead. Then, for Ultima Weapon, you could have to make an instance of every Dream Eater at least once to keep the spirit of synth grinding alive or whatever. I don't know, it just bothers me that the reward you get for doing a hard thing is something whose only purpose is to make that hard thing slightly easier, says the guy who loves Monster Hunter. In conclusion of everything I've said here, the worlds are neat but severely underbaked, the gameplay is better than BBS except for the everything that still sucks, and the story is as stupid as everyone says it is. All that's left now is to wait for Kingdom Hearts 3. Hopefully you guys won't have to wait 7 years for my video on it to come out, but we'll see. At least, that's what I should be saying. Instead, Osaka Team re-released every game in HD, and for the 2.8 collection that Dream Drop Distance was included on, they also threw in not only a movie detailing the furthest back past from before the Keyblade War and the major players that set it into motion and, you know, all that jazz, but also a brand new game, though I use that term loosely. It's bad. Okay, but for real, I really shouldn't even go over this because I have like a 2.5 hour stream detailing all of my thoughts on both the gameplay and story, and Yeah, it's bad. I'm not going to talk about the gameplay here because I'm going to have to save my thoughts for the Kingdom Hearts 3 video, but I do feel like it's worth going over just how bad this business practice is, which I feel is so important to say that I'm basically just repeating what I already said in the stream. Between when Dream Drop Distance first released on the 3DS in 2012 and 0.2's release, with the final chapter 2.8 HD final prologue thing and all that, was a dearth of content that consisted of remasters, re-releases, mobile games, and about fuck all to do with Kingdom Hearts 3, and it lasted a total of 5 years. Since Kingdom Hearts 2's release, it's been 12 years, or 11 if you're in the West. And what does Square Enix decide to do in their infinite wisdom? Well, in lieu of actually working on and releasing Kingdom Hearts 3, which any other developer would have had out by 2010 probably, they sell us a remaster of a game that nobody liked and nobody gave a fuck about, a movie detailing events in the past that nobody gives a fuck about, and a tech demo for a game that we've been getting blueballed about for over a goddamn decade. Hello, are you kidding me? How is nobody talking about how much of a scam this is? Why are we paying to playtest the Kingdom Hearts 3 engine? Why are we paying to get cucked? Because normally that's only a once a year thing and I get arrested if I don't. Maybe people bought it for the story, maybe, I guess? Well, it's Aqua fucking around in the realm of darkness and that's it. Fantastic. There's absolutely nothing to go over here. I mean, Aqua is at her most tolerable, yes, but that bar is so low that I'm surprised Lucifer can fucking bend his way under it. Dude, have you listened to just how bored Jason Doring sounds as Terra here?
But your heart is just painting the picture that it so wants to see.
God, it's like they picked him up high off the street and just shoved a script into his mouth and recorded whatever garbled mess came out as he was passing out from asphyxiation. Do you want to know about the gameplay? It's worse than Kingdom Hearts 3 because somehow, someway, Osaka Team still doesn't know how to do enemy design. They have invincible states. There's a part where you fight black enemies against a pitch black backdrop and they're all lightning fast because that was tested. There's a multitude of super armor bullshit attacks, and it has the worst final boss in the series because it's not fucking anything, and it's also the most infuriating fucking thing in the world. What happened to this goddamn series? Where's the magic? Where's the whimsy? Where's the good gameplay and well thought out mechanics? Ever since 2010, Square Enix has done nothing but fuck us over on every one of its stupid releases. Final Fantasy 15 was gutted and butchered and then given back to us piecemeal because of a garbage development cycle. The Kingdom Hearts series has been drowning in its own bullshit since BBS released, and there hasn't been a decent fucking game developed internally by Square Enix in over a goddamn decade. Come on, guys. Well, I think that's all there is to say. Was this all building toward Kingdom Hearts 3? I mean, we all know narratively it isn't, but in terms of Square Enix's dev teams, was it all prep work for Kingdom Hearts 3? Was the wait worth it? We'll have to find out next time, but for now, I need to cleanse my palate by playing a game that isn't fucking garbage. Thank you all for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Until the end, my friends. Hey all, I wanted to take some time here at the end to let you know of a few things. First, I'm streaming now, which some of you might be interested in. I streamed my entire playthrough of Dream Drop Distance on this very channel, and will be doing so for Kingdom Hearts 3 when I start working on that entry. And it was a ton of fun, so I hope to see some of you here. That said, Kingdom Hearts 3 probably won't be for a while. I don't think it'll be too long of a wait, and the stream will probably come within a month or two. But that's going to be a monster of a script like BBS was, so it's going to take me a bit. That said, I'm going to be working on other projects that I've had in mind in the meantime. I have a few polls in my community tab where you can vote on what I work on most often, which means that if you want to see me talk about something really badly, you can make me talk about it. Above all, however, I want to thank you all for watching to the end of the video. It means the world to me that you do so, and I hope it was entertaining at the very least. Please leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe if you liked the vid. Until the end, my friends.